Well, let's talk about another story here in Asia. Policymakers are beginning to worry about a property market bubble. South Korea's central bank says it may use monetary policy to cool the surge in prices. Meanwhile, here in Singapore, the government last week announced measures to curb speculation in the real estate sector. But will these policies be enough, and will it work? Let's ask Peter Churchhouse, chairman at Portwood Capital, live from our Hong Kong studios. Peter, good to have you with us. Is this surge in property prices in many parts of Asia anything to worry about?
Well, I'm not sure it's anything particular to worry about just yet, but of course the potential for a bubble to form definitely is there. We've got interest rates at many countries in the lowest level ever. We've got affordability is still very good. Employment prospects are looking a little better than perhaps they were a few months ago. So we have seen a definite pickup in property prices, particularly in Singapore and Hong Kong. But really, I'm not sure we would define that as a bubble just yet, but it's certainly heading in that direction. And given that governments are well aware that the financial disaster we've just been through was really property driven, of course they're going to be very wary and very vigilant about any bubbles popping up in the future.
Could this force central banks in parts of Asia to move interest rates higher sooner than expected? Could this force their hand?
Well, absolutely. Markets like Hong Kong probably cannot do that because of the pegged currency to the US dollar. So Hong Kong is still a slave to Mr. Bernanke's policy in the US, and we think that's probably like to be on hold for the next 12 months. But I think markets like Singapore and Korea, definitely we could see, I think, a more independent monetary policy being expressed there. And as we mentioned, last week we did see the Singapore government firing some warning signals across the bow of the property market there. We've even seen in Hong Kong the monetary authorities here talking also or warning about the possibility of bubbles and so on. So yes, and even in China, I think very much so, central bankers in China are worried about the prospects of unsustainable pickup in property prices having a damaging effect later down the track.
Peter, looking at, this is Julia Borston here in the United States, looking at some of the fundamental factors driving this trend, what will it take to reverse this?
Well, quite frankly, the authorities in this part of the world have lots of tools in their armory to deal with this. Traditionally, they've used both monetary policy and administrative measures, particularly in China. There's all sorts of measures that they can use on taxation, on just pure outright administrative things that they can do to slow down the markets, and they can force all sorts of actions on the part of municipal authorities, regional authorities, and so on. And they have been doing that in the past. Singapore has done the same thing in the past, and so has Hong Kong. So it's a combination of both monetary and outright administrative measures to slow things down. And I'm pretty sure they will not be slow in using these measures this time round if they see bubbles occurring, and they're signaling that's exactly what they're looking at.
So, Peter, it's Louisa in London. Are you indicating then that the measures that they have been using have been effective and will continue to be effective now if they put them in place quickly? And/or how long is the lag period going to be before things start slowing down then?
In the past, administrative measures were, a couple of years ago, were being adopted in China to slow the policy, to the property markets down. And it took quite a while for those measures to take effect. They would introduce a measure and then watch and wait for a month or two, then introduce some more measures, and over a period of 6 or 8 months it actually worked. In Singapore, you saw even a couple of, or about a month ago, some measures being announced to slow down financing for second homes and so on in Singapore. Now we're talking about another round of measures this last week. So again, they can introduce these things piecemeal, ad hoc way to see how each measure reacts in the marketplace. And it does actually always take a little bit of time for these measures to filter through, often about 3 to 6 months. So I expect to see that again here.
Peter, this is Christine again. Quick one from me. You know, we keep talking about this housing crisis in the U.S. What's the potential of a crisis happening with housing here in Asia?
I think it's much less the case in Asia this time round. Quite frankly, Asia had its major crisis in the late 90s when we had a massive oversupply of housing, huge excess credit extension to real estate. Well, that excess got washed out in the early part of this decade, and quite frankly, Asia hasn't had enough time to get itself back into trouble again following the crisis it had in the late 90s. So I think we're very lucky in Asia. We don't have massive excesses of borrowing on the part of developers. We don't have massive consumer credit. We don't have huge amounts of construction going on out there, massive oversupply of real estate. Really only in one or two places is that occurring. So this time around, I think Asia is much better positioned than it was perhaps in the late 90s.
Peter, very good talking to you. Thank you very much for that. Peter Churchhouse, Chairman, Portwood Capital.